Diabetes Connections is brought to you by OneDrop, created for people with diabetes by people who have diabetes, by Real Good Foods, real food you feel good about eating, and by Dexcom. Take control of your diabetes and live life to the fullest with Dexcom.
This is Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
Welcome to another week of the show. I am so glad to have you along for episode 300. How about that? I feel like we should have a little bit of fanfare. You know what? Let's do it again. All right. Welcome to episode 300. You know, what a number. I'm really excited. I don't have a lot to say about it in terms of like how we got here or what I was thinking. You know, when I launched the show in 2015, I wasn't thinking about getting to a milestone number of episodes. I was just thinking about doing a show and seeing what it would be like and hoping to have interesting conversations. But here we are. I did a Facebook Live a couple of days ago, and that is what the majority of this show is going to be about. Plus, I'm adding in some of the stories you submitted, because I wanted to focus on what was happening in our lives and in the diabetes community in 2015 when we started Diabetes Connections. I also talked about podcasting on that Facebook Live, why you should probably start one. I'm not kidding. Why not? And a few thoughts about the future of this show. This week's Tell Me Something Good is going to feature a couple of those stories from 2015. And, you know, what am I talking about? Well, here's a couple of things that people sent in. Richard Vaughn, who has lived with diabetes since 1945. That's right. He's coming up on 75 years with type 1. He chimed in with, hey, in 2015, I think that's when you and I did a podcast together. And that's also when he attended Friends for Life. It was great to meet him there. And I will link up the episode that I did with Richard. He's just phenomenal. And I'm so glad he contributes a lot to this community and tells us the stories of how, how different things were. Yerachmiel Altman wrote that he started his children's type 1 education game called Insulinopoly, of course, based on Monopoly. He started that, he thinks, about 5 years ago. His books also came, but they came a little bit later. And Maura McCarthy posted a screenshot about her daughter Lauren's training for their JDRF ride. And this post was all about talking about her management, right? How she was going to do this for a very long JDRF bike ride. And this post was her longest ride to that date. And it was, as Maura said, the first time her plan worked. You can see all of these in the Diabetes Connections Facebook group. And for Tell Me Something Good, after the Facebook Live that you're going to hear in just a moment, I'm going to share some more stories from the community. Can't get to 300 episodes without acknowledging our fabulous sponsors. Diabetes Connections is brought to you by OneDrop. And, it is so nice to find a diabetes product that not only does what you need, but also fits in perfectly with your life. OneDrop is that. It is the sleekest looking and most modern meter my family has ever used. And it's not just about their modern meter setup. You can also send your readings to the mobile app automatically and review your data anytime. Instantly share blood glucose reports with your healthcare team. It also works with your Dexcom, Fitbit, or your Apple Watch. Not to mention their awesome test strip subscription plans. Pick up as many test strips as you need, and they'll deliver them to your door. OneDrop, diabetes care delivered. Learn more, go to diabetes-connections.com and click on the OneDrop logo. When I started Diabetes Connections, it was in the midst of some very exciting changes that were coming. 2015 wasn't the start by any means of the We Are Not Waiting movement, of the diabetes technology push forward that we've seen and that we have benefited from really just in the last couple of years. But it was this time where you could see that more was possible when the ideas and energy from a smaller group of people with really exceptional engineering and technical knowledge was getting to people like me who really didn't know that these things were even possible, and then pushing industry. So it was a really interesting time to start a podcast where I didn't realize at the time technology was going to be the top story that listeners were interested in, at least my listeners. So that's what I'm focusing on for a lot of this. You'll hear some Facebook Live references, and by that I mean, looking at the screen or talking about commenters, but I did take most of those out. Thanks to everybody who joined me live on Facebook for that. You can follow along at Diabetes Connections on Facebook. The easiest way is, of course, to join the Facebook group. And I usually post what I'm doing on Instagram as well. And over on Instagram, I am just Stacey Sims. But here we go. A look back at the diabetes community in 2015. Okay, so welcome to this taping of episode 300 of Diabetes Connections. What I want to do tonight is not just kind of cheat a little bit and tape an episode by doing a Facebook Live and then putting it out, which means I don't have to do an interview or extra work for it. But what I really want to do is talk to you about what was life like in the diabetes community in 2015, because that's when we launched the show. So what I'm asking you to do is play along with me here. I have some information. I've written some things out, but you know me if you've seen me do these lives before. Generally, I don't script things out. And I really want to hear from you. So if as I talk, you say, oh, no, Stacey, I was there when Night Scout did that, and that is not how that happened. Or I did get the first blah, 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 and that's not how it went. Please feel free to jump in and comment. And overall, I'd also like you to share your stories from 2015. And you can do that here as we're having the live, or you can post it later in the group or later under this video. Because what I'm hoping to do is incorporate some of those stories into the actual audio podcast episode that will be released next week. All right, so let me tell you a little bit about where I was in 2015 when I started the podcast. And to tell that story, I got to back up a little bit. I was a radio show host in Charlotte, North Carolina for 10 years. Before that, I was a TV anchor and reporter in a couple of different cities, including Charlotte. And I made the switch from television to radio here. We still live just outside of Charlotte. So I left at the very end of 2012. I had just gotten sick and tired of getting up at 2:30 in the morning for all those years. I had done that for 13 years. That was great. And then when my daughter was in middle school in 2015, when I'm going to be talking about the bulk of this stuff, Benny was in 4th grade. So Leah was in 8th grade. But at the time that I left, she had just really started, end of 5th grade, that whole middle school transition. And she was going to bed so late that I could no longer do it. I was getting like 4 or 5 hours of sleep and I got very sick. So I left at the end of 2012. And then in 2013, I was working, doing commercials and voice work at another local radio station. And that was really funny because they had no talent. They had no DJs. They just had music. And when you do that, that's great for the listener, but you need someone to do the actual commercials. So we kind of faked up a few things for me to do in between songs. And I did a community calendar, but it was all just to get me to do commercials. So I did that for a year. And then I worked at Time Warner Cable, which is a local news station like you have in your town. You have, if it's New York One in New York or Spectrum News or whatever the heck it is now, wherever, they're all different. They're all, small cable, 24-hour cable networks. And I was a health reporter for them. And that was the job I took for the health insurance, which I know a lot of you can relate to. So that was, I think they call it a multimedia journalist now, an MMJ, but it's a one-man band. So I was running around Charlotte, schlepping my own camera, setting up, my tripod. It was interesting, to say the least, but I loved the editing part of it. I didn't mind. The only thing I didn't like was the schlepping. I love talking to people. I always have. And I liked the editing part as well. But I decided during that year that I was going to start my own podcast because I had been listening to podcasts for forever. I mean, I'm one of those people that I had an iPod and I would download podcasts to the iPod. And that is obviously how you get the word podcast. But I think people have forgotten that once upon a time, we took our iPod minis or nanos or just a regular old iPod and you'd plug it into your computer and you would physically download the shows. So it was a barrier, right, to listening. A lot of people didn't do that, but I did. And I listened to a bunch of diabetes podcasts. There were a lot. There still are a lot, of course, but there have been a lot over the years. I'm far from the first. But I would get frustrated listening only because, and I'm not going to name any names, but I would get frustrated because they were all storytellers, right? It was wonderful personal information, mostly adults with type 1 who would talk about their experiences, which is great. But sometimes they would have guests on or they would talk to each other. And I would be walking my dog and wearing my headphones and yelling like, ask him a follow-up question, or I want to know more about that. Or wait a minute, do you endorse that product that you were just talking about? Like, let's get some disclosures here. So it used to make me laugh. My reaction made me laugh. So I said, all right, I'm just going to start my own podcast. And then in 2015, my husband's employment situation changed. He was in the restaurant business, which is why I needed to get the health insurance, but he got a different job. And suddenly I was free to do whatever I wanted, which is an amazing feeling. So I started the show. And that's how you get Diabetes Connections. So what else was going on in the diabetes community around that time? Well, if you're watching this, you already know, I am sure, that my son was diagnosed right before he was 2. He was diagnosed in 2006. And he was, I think I said he was in the 4th grade, right? So we were just dipping a toe into continuous glucose monitoring. He started that in 2013. And then at the end, I'm going to get ahead of myself here. At the end of 2014, maybe mid 2014, we all started using those share cradles. I don't know if you remember that. And then, we moved on from there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to talk about, I'm getting ahead of myself. I'm going to try to incorporate what was going on in the diabetes community in 2015 with what was going on in my life as well. And as you're watching, if you want to chime in, again, feel free. And if you are watching this on the World's Worst Diabetes Mom page, I don't think I can see your comments in real time, only on the Diabetes Connections page. I had that issue another time that I did this. So I'm sorry if you're posting over there, maybe jump on over or, text me if you're a friend. All right. So what was happening? Well, 2015 was a really interesting year in terms of diabetes technology because it wasn't the year that We Are Not Waiting and Night Scout and all of that started. It was a year that it started reaching so many people and really started entering the consciousness and the conversation of more of the mainstream, diabetes folks. So I'm not going to recap everything because who can recap everything? But in 2013, John Kostick tweeted out the picture of him freeing the Dexcom data, and he could see his son's information on any web-based device. And then We Are Not Waiting. That term was coined at the Diabetes Mind Innovation Summit in late 2013. I wrote down, 2013. Okay, checking my notes. I did not write down who wrote that, who said that. I want to say it was Elaine Desborough, but I might get that wrong. So I could be corrected on that one. But that's what was happening in 2013. And then in 2014, Dana Lewis and Scott Librand really put the polish on their open APS system. They closed their loop at the very end of 2014 and started really showing it in 2015. So that's where we were in terms of the We Are Not Waiting and the Night Scout stuff. And I'll talk about that a little bit more in a couple of minutes. So in the beginning of 2015, I went to a JDRF summit in Greensboro. It was one of the first summits that I headlined for JDRF. I was the big welcome, although I was sort of the warm-up act for a magician for the kids too. So I had all of these kids sitting around me waiting for the magician to show up and wanting me to shut up. I'm going to post some pictures in the next week leading up to this episode. And I will show you. You can see all the kids waiting. They look like they're, enraptured by me. They are not. They are waiting for the magician. But that was a really great summit. And at that time, I didn't realize this. I had started doing podcast interviews already. I had a couple of interviews in the can. And it's funny to listen back because I was still in radio mode. So what I was doing was resetting. And I'm actually going to do that in just a moment for anyone who's joined late. But when you reset, you are being courteous to your incoming listeners on the radio. So you've heard this happen, right? You're listening to does anybody listen to news talk anymore? You're listening to your news talk station or you're listening to your DJs and, they're having a whole conversation or they're interviewing someone and they're like, hey, we'll continue in just a moment. You're listening to News Talk 1110 WBT, Charlotte's home of the Panthers or, whatever it is. And you do that so that if someone has stumbled upon the interview, you can tell them who the guest is because they may not recognize the voice, why you're talking about it, and what the radio station call letters are. So in the interview with Katie Helms, who I spoke with in January of 2015, but didn't air until later, we talked about her experience with, testing artificial pancreas stuff. I reset that interview probably 20 times in 30 minutes. Hi, I'm talking to Katie. We're here at Diabetes Connections. I might have cut some of it out, but I didn't know what I was doing with podcasting. And you don't have to reset anything with podcasting because people know why they're there, right? They actively found it. They rarely start in the middle. So I lost that habit, but I don't think it was in time. So I'll reset right now. Hello and welcome. I'm taping my 300th episode for Diabetes Connections, and I'm going through what was big news in 2015 for the diabetes community and also what was little news for my family at that time. So if you have a comment, if you're just joining, feel free to post what was going on with your diabetes in 2015 and feel free to jump in and correct me if you think I got something wrong, because I've just, I'm making lists, I'm doing research, but some of this, especially with Night Scout stuff and We Are Not Waiting stuff, so many people did so many great things. And I haven't been able to talk to everybody from that time. And I really want to. So I'll tell you about that later. Okay, so what else happened? I did the Greensboro Summit, and then also in January, Dexcom Share with no cradle was approved by the FDA. And we will talk more about that cradle. I know a lot of you remember that in just a moment. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Real Good Foods, real food you feel good about eating. Low carb, high protein, real ingredients. Their stuffed chicken is so good. Have you tried this yet? They have some new varieties and they sell out quick. But the bacon wrapped stuffed chicken is so delicious. It comes in a couple of different varieties. When they have something that people really like their stuffed chicken has been out for a while, but the bacon wrap is new, they always find a way to make it better. They also have these stuffed nuggets. They are stuffed chicken nuggets. And it seems like such an indulgence. You put them in the air fryer. Oh, they're so good, but they're low carb, keto friendly. I mean, they could be a quick snack for a teenager. They could be a whole meal for a little kid. And they only have 2 net carbs and 22 grams of protein. And of course, all the ingredients are real. You can read them very easily. Find out more. You can get free shipping for orders over $50 at diabetes-connections.com and click on the Real Good Foods logo. Now back to reminiscing about the early Dexcom Share and that cradle. All right, so I mentioned the cradle. Now, I know a lot of you know exactly what I'm talking about, and I have a cradle somewhere here in the house, but we moved. I don't know where it is. I wanted to kind of hold it up and show it to you, but we only use, this will be no surprise if you listen to the show, we only use the Share cradle at night. I had zero interest in plugging it into a battery pack and shoving it in the backpack or anything like that. So I'm the world's worst diabetes mom. So we only used it at home at night. But I know a lot of people who did just that. They threw a battery pack on it and they took it, wherever it would go. But it was a pain. It was clunky and it had this really sensitive, stupid port, right? The USB port was terrible. So it was not great. And then in January, the FDA approved the cradle-less Share. I believe it was called Share 2. And that was very exciting. And that came out in March, April. It was released to some influencers. Did we call them influencers in 2015? We must have. But, it was sent out to some people who got to try it out. It was pretty much out in March. Then in February, Tandem Odyssey was announced. I forgot all about this. I forgot this was called Odyssey, and I forgot that it came out to some derision. So what was this? Tandem announced that in the future, you would not have to change your pump in. You wouldn't have to change out the hardware. You would do an upload from the computer, which those of us who are Tandem T-Slim people, I've done 3 updates via the computer. I think the first one was when Dexcom G5 was compatible, and then Basal IQ, and now Control IQ. So at the time, there was a little bit of controversy because I think there was a G4 update coming that people weren't going to get or wouldn't be able to download. So you actually had to change your pump one more time. But that's my understanding. And it's funny to look back and see that this was ever something controversial because it's such a great feature. And I'm surprised, more of them. There's only 3 pump companies left in the United States right now aren't doing that. But that was February of 2015. And also in February, Afrezza was launched. Inhalable insulin was available after, years and years of, we'd heard about this. It had kind of come in and come out. It was confused by a lot of people with a previous inhaled insulin that really didn't go over very well. So they had a real uphill battle, and they still do. But man, we've done at least one episode on Afrezza, and Benny's been talking about wanting to try it. And, with Control IQ, it's kind of not, I don't think it's conducive with that, but I'm definitely still following along. Okay. Also in February, in my blog, I had talked about my insulin sensitivity factor mistake and also the always be nervous Dexcom experience that wound up in the book. I just thought that was funny that I'd forgotten when I even had written those things, but the ISF insulin sensitivity factor was the mistake I had made. And I've probably made it since then when I always think the larger number, the smaller number, you know what I mean? And then always be nervous was I was terrified to do the G5 on Benny. Terrified. Also the G4 because it was such a big device, right? It was like a chung and so I didn't want to do that, but he was great. My husband had always done it. My husband had always inserted it until we were away on vacation without him. And I did it. And I told Benny I was really nervous and he was like, always be nervous. That's the best way to be. Whatever works. Also in February, Ryan Reed, NASCAR driver with type 1, won at Daytona. And we were all, of course, cheering for him. But what's funny about Ryan is he moved here from California when he was like 18 years old, 17 years old. And he went to a whole bunch of type 1 events for kids. So we got to meet him before he was even on the Xfinity circuit. So, it's like the minors and the majors with NASCAR and all that stuff. So not that I have his phone number or anything, but we've known him for a really long time. And so it was really cool to watch him win. And I'll have to post that picture too, because I think I'm laughing. Benny is so tiny in this first picture with Ryan. I think Benny's probably bigger than him now. So it's just crazy how things change. We knew him when, March, there were reviews posted about the Share No Cradle in use. And some of the first conversations happened. And you can see this on 6 Until Me on Carrie's blog. If you go back, some of the first conversations about how do we share? How do we decide if we're going to share with whom? That sort of thing. Very good stuff. The first unconference happened in Vegas. That was in March. And that was the brainchild of Christelle Marchana-Prigliano. I think the unconference is kind of this, I don't know, for people who were there, it's kind of this magical memory. I wasn't there. I was working with Animus. I was blogging with them and for them. They were paying me for appearances. That's how I first went to Friends for Life, but not in 2015. And I loved working with them, and they wanted to send me to the unconference. So I filled everything out, and I was rejected because I was a parent. I'm not a person with diabetes. And I thought, that's cool. I really was impressed by that. I thought it was really nice because I do think that people with diabetes need a place to themselves. They don't need their parents coming along and all the time, and certainly not as adults. And I had no problem. But I wanted to learn more about it. So I picked up the phone and called Christelle, and that's how we got to talking about it. And I think she thought I was going to yell at her. Like, I want to come. I'm a parent and I need to learn. And I was fine with it. And it was interesting. And they later did open it up to the PLUs, the people who love us. And that's awesome because, you want spouses and you want friends, you want partners, parents, sometimes we're our own worst enemies. But I'll talk more about Christelle in just a moment. Also, that year was the first year of the BEAM team. And that was our elementary school walk team for JDRF. So we had done the Benny's Brigade. That was the name of our team since he was like 3 or 4 years old. I had spent the first couple of years of that, not fundraising, just kind of learning the ropes and getting the lay of the land. And I think that my friends at JDRF probably don't want to hear this, especially not this year. But if you are newly diagnosed or newer diagnosed and feeling overwhelmed about a JDRF or an ADA walk or any event, how am I going to fundraise? What am I going to call my team? Just go. Just go. Find another team to join or just show up and say, I just want to register. And don't worry if you raise $5 or nothing. If you just pay the registration fee, you've already fundraised. Because being in that air is what it's all about. You'll find your people. You'll feel so much better about things. And then you can jump in and fundraise. I mean, we've done a lot over the years, and I'm really happy with how it went. But after we were Benny's Brigade for a few years, he said that he wanted to involve the whole school. Okay, so we did. We involved the whole school. There were 4 children with type 1 at that point. Benny, Ella, Addie, and Michael, which is how you get the BEAM team. I found the funniest drawing. I hope he's not coming in. The funniest drawing. I think it's from him. We let the kids pick the name, pick the theme. Our school nurse at that time was a woman living with type 1. So she was fabulous. And she was so into these kids. And they met and they worked on it. And it was lighting the way, the BEAM team lighting the way to a cure for type 1 or something like that. And it turned out we incorporated a tiger, which was the school mascot. But the initial logo, let's just say my kid is more Picasso than real life. But it was very funny. And I loved that. We did that for 2 years. Interestingly, I kind of had to convince JDRF, and the same people aren't working at the chapter, so I think I can say this. I had to convince JDRF that we could do this, that we could be a school team and a big team, and we didn't have to do a school walk alone. We could do a walk team. So the lesson there is if you have a good idea, and you are confident that it's going to pay off either in fundraising or in spirit, just go for it. They'll come along. So the first episode of Diabetes Connections actually aired on May 29th, but we were not on iTunes. So I don't officially count that, or Apple Podcasts now it's called. So we weren't on any podcast apps. I just threw it on the website. I think it was just my blog at that point. I don't think the website was even complete. And that first episode was Christelle Marchana-Prigliano, because she wouldn't let me go to the unconference. And I just thought it would be a lot of fun to talk to her. So she was great. And we spoke about what that meant. You can go back and listen to the episode if you want to. I'm sure it's terrible because even after all those years in broadcasting, your first episode of anything is going to be awful. So thank you, Christelle. And I spilled, oh my gosh, I forgot all about this. I spilled coffee or water or whatever I was drinking all over the place. When I first started out, I was recording in 2 different areas. One of them was beeping. It wasn't recording right. It was just making noise. So I had to turn it off. And then I thought, oh my God, I have no backup. What's going to happen? I love to have a backup. I have a backup rolling right now. But Christelle was great and put up with my shenanigans. Also that in June, Sierra Sanderson, who had done the Show Me Your Pump in 2014. Of course, she was in the Miss America pageant. She came on the show because she had a new book out and she was great to talk to. And of course, she's going to school for, I want to say it's engineering, but I don't know what specific type. She's genius. But that's one of the things that was happening in the community is that she had taken that platform from the Miss America pageant and really turned it into something so positive that everybody could share. In June, should I read this? Okay. Nick Jonas officially teamed up with Dexcom. So he became one of the Dexcom warriors. If you've seen the pictures of Nick Jonas with, he's like pulling his shirt up and the Dexcom's there. And it's kind of a weird feeling as a middle-aged mom to have those pictures on your phone. I don't know who has that picture on their phone, but somebody might. So that's where that picture came from. Nick Jonas was also talking about Beyond Type 1 at that time, and we'll get to that in just a couple of minutes. In July, this was actually a big milestone for me, and I shouldn't joke around about it too much. So I went to Friends for Life, like I had for a few years, but I went to Master Lab that year, and I don't believe they have continued with Master Lab. Again, correct me if I'm wrong. This was part of the Diabetes Hands Foundation, which is now under the Beyond Type 1 umbrella. And Beyond Type 1, you should bring back Master Lab because it was amazing. And Master Lab was more of a deep dive into how to get the message across. It was all about advocacy. It wasn't about, influencers and bloggers getting clicks. It was about hardcore advocacy and how to get your message across. And I got a call earlier that year from Melissa Lee, who was the head of the Diabetes Hands Foundation at the time. And she asked me if I would speak. And I thought, why is she asking me to speak? I mean, I was excited. I mean, that was really cool. But we talked about media stuff, how I could help people tell their stories. And then I found out that it was the day, I would have to miss the day that I dropped my kids off at camp. Not diabetes camp, but the regular sleepaway camp where they go for a month. So I told Melissa I didn't think I could do it, but I would get back to her. So I went home and I talked to my family. And, dropping your kids off at sleepaway camp is, I don't know, it's for me, right? It's not for them. You pull up and they're like, see ya. If you're in the right camp and they've been there before, they don't care. But I like to be there and I like to make sure that the bunks are set and the cabins are okay. And, that the medical people have all of Benny's stuff, even though, it was not his first year there. So my kids and my husband said, go, go, go. It's much more important that you go to Master Lab. And I'm so glad that I did. It was absolutely amazing. And really, this is not going to sound humble, and I think that's okay. It really made me feel like I had a place in the diabetes community, that I had a voice that was heard, that I had a message that could help. And that message wasn't even about diabetes. That was about media. If you were there, you remember the takeaway, no black turtlenecks. If you're ever on television, no black turtlenecks. You look like a floating head. But there was more to it than that. That was really significant and a turning point for me because it made me look at my voice a little bit differently. So thanks, Melissa, for that. Okay. Wow. Friends for Life that year was big time. So Night Scout had its first Friends for Life booth. If you're not familiar, Friends for Life is the largest family diabetes conference in the country, if not the world. It just celebrated 20 years last year. It is virtual this year. So they're not going to have it in July in Orlando. It's hosted, not always, but I believe for the next few years on Disney World property. It's a great time and it's an amazing chance to learn and meet people and socialize. And they often premiere new technology there. So Night Scout had its first Friends for Life booth. I did some interviewing there. I interviewed Kate Farnsworth and I interviewed James Wedding, and I'm smiling because they're like the perfect two people to talk to. Kate is like, I think they call her Saint Kate, although I might be, there's two Kates, but she's definitely a saint. And she helped so many people with that Pebble interface, especially at the beginning. And James is also a wonderful person. And he had two great phrases that have since just definitely stuck with me. He's the guy who was like, why isn't this thing talking to that thing? And that's was his impetus was for, trying to get the stuff to work better. But he also has a great line that I use all the time. Thank you, James, which is wake me when it ships. We hear all about this wonderful technology and great things that are coming out. Wake me when it ships. I love that one. I also schlepped all of my equipment to Friends for Life that year, which is really funny. Because at the time I was using a gigantic Blue Yeti microphone. You can see I now use the ATR 2100, which is a sleeker and better microphone for my voice. The Yeti's a good mic. We can talk about that another episode. But it's very heavy. and I schlepped it, and I schlepped like soundproofing equipment and all this stuff. I did not need to, but I did some really fun interviews there. So also at that Friends for Life, the eyelet hardware premiered, and that is Beta Bionics, Ed Damiano's company, which is still moving forward. They are the dual chambered pump. It'll probably come out or go into clinical trials with just insulin, but the idea is that it's insulin and glucagon together. We've done several shows with Ed talking about it, but the eyelet, the hardware itself, was first shown in 2015 at Friends for Life. It was a very, very exciting time. There were a lot of emotional people. Quick hi to the comments. So, Jamie, hello. And Steve from Canada, maybe? And I didn't say hi to the other people who have already been here. I'm sorry. Neva and Denise, Jenna. I feel like it's Reading Rainbow. And I see you. And hello. Is everybody else old enough to remember Reading Rainbow? Was it Reading Rainbow? Oh, no, it was the Magic Garden. Magic Garden. With the magic mirror? No? I'm old. Okay. So we'll continue on with this. Also, from that summer, it's funny to listen back to the podcast because Benny is 10, and you can hear in every episode that I am terrified of the teen years. I am terrified that suddenly my sweet kid who's, I hate to use that word compliant, let's say responsible, I don't know, whose diabetes never really seemed to bother him. Let's say that, right? He made mistakes. He didn't always listen, but he took care of what he needed to take care of, and he did it with a smile. And I was terrified that that was all going to change. And you can hear in those episodes that I think I can do something about it. I'm asking people and I'm saying, well, maybe if I do this, I can forestall that, or I can change this. It's really funny because what I'm saying to myself is I can keep my child from his, developmental teendom. Yeah, that was pretty funny. The other thing that came out that summer for us is I created the Diabetes Free Day, which I've talked about before. And if you're not familiar with that, Benny goes to this month-long sleepaway camp, and it's not a diabetes camp, so he has to do everything himself. He does every blood sugar poke, every check, every pump inset, every insulin cartridge filling, whatever. He troubleshoots. There's a wonderful medical staff there. They are not a diabetes staff, so they just know enough to keep him safe. They know the important stuff, but they will not touch him to do the diabetes management. So when he comes home, he's kind of exhausted because that's a lot to take care of when you're 9, 10, 11, 12, right? So I used to give him a diabetes-free day for a day or two as soon as he came home. And that meant he didn't have to think about it once. I did every blood sugar check. I counted every carb. I entered it into his pump. He didn't have to think about it at all. And, I said, I'll do this whenever you want, but he only ever wanted it right after camp. It was very helpful to us. And there was another, I'll have to put this in the group because it's a picture. I should have pulled it up, but there was a counselor that year at camp that for whatever reason, and, I think we forget how just general diabetes maintenance is so time consuming. And if other people care enough to pay attention, it can be pretty impressive, right? And this counselor could not believe that this kid had all this responsibility and did it. Now, he didn't do everything right. Those summer, I'm telling you, that summer month at camp, we had a lot of trade-offs. That's a different episode altogether. But I knew he was safe. And the trade-off of him experiencing that 1 month of independence and this wonderful camp has been worth it. And it really is his happiest place. So that's been wonderful. But this counselor drew a picture of Professor X from the X-Men and talked about how Benny was like that and how Benny was really terrific. It was, I cry thinking about it. So I'll post that. I've taken the kid's name out and all the identifying stuff, but I'll post it because it really is a testament to all people with diabetes, to what you have to do. All right, so let's zoom on to August because wait till you hear what happens. In August of 2015, the diabetes community is cooking. All right, in August, Sugar Surfing is published for the first time. Stephen Ponder puts together all of the information he's acquired over the years and publishes Sugar Surfing, which is still, in print and improved every year. OneDrop debuts. OneDrop, a fabulous sponsor of the show. Appreciate them very much, as is Dexcom, of course. But they debut their Sleek, it's always called Sleek, new meter and their coaching program. And they've made a lot of changes and improvements since then too, but that's when they debuted. Bigfoot Biomedical, which actually was formed in 2014, but they made a lot of headlines in 2015. The Asante Snap pump was discontinued. I know a lot of people loved that pump. And Bigfoot grabbed it and they made it part of their line. So as of this point, I think most of us expected to hear or see products from Bigfoot, but right now, my understanding is that they're working on their pen system, a phone app. We'll keep on that and we will see. But if you go back to Bigfoot in 2015, oh my gosh, they were everywhere. And I think they were the second episode of the podcast, if you really want to blast from the past. So the Type 0 technology, that company was formed. So this is the research at University of Virginia that became the brains of Control IQ. But before it was Control IQ, it was the UVA stuff. And then it became Type 0 technology. And that happened in 2015. Of course, it was later sold to Dexcom. And it was all started with grants, including a grant from JDRF. So if you really want to dig back to Control IQ, it's a really interesting story to see how something starts as an idea and then becomes a research project, then becomes a commercial project, and finally ends up in our pumps. And then the Tandem and G4 combo was released. And I'm going to say this delicately because I'll link this blog up too. It was released to a bunch of meh. It was like, meh, right? And it's hard to imagine that, but it's because the Dexcom stuff was moving so quickly that the pumps really weren't able to keep up too much. So there wasn't a lot of integration that mattered. It was cool if you just wanted to look at your pump and see the number, but you also had a receiver generally at that point. So it was, it sparked a big conversation in the community. I wrote a blog post called Grateful Yes, Quiet No, because I had posted about how can't this stuff just do more? And a lot of people, and I get it, a lot of people said, I've had diabetes for 20 years. You should be grateful for what you have, and that makes a lot of sense. And I've seen that, people who are diagnosed now and come home with a CGM, and that happens a lot. They have no idea what it was like in the olden days when we walked uphill both ways in the snow, 13 years ago when I poked my 2-year-old 10 times a day. Well, wah, poor me, 20 years ago, I might not even had a home blood glucose meter for that kid, right? We'd be dipping his urine in test tubes. It's all whatever your perspective is. But that was a really interesting time because we were seeing this movement of the off-label, we are not waiting stuff, right? That community was boogieing along and the commercial stuff was like perception. It obviously wasn't behind the scenes, but we were getting a good kind of impatient, I think. I think that pushed industry along. And then later that year, the G5 was approved and launched with no receiver needed. So it's going to go right to your phone. iPhone only to launch. If you Android people remember, we kept talking about Android for so long, it seemed like. But I have a quote from Benny. So Benny's reaction to the G5 with no receiver needed was, as I read it to him, and I'm like, look what just happened. He said, so when it comes out, you'll finally get me a cell phone. He is the only 5th grader in the world without one. So that was pretty funny. And it reminded me that we didn't get him a cell phone, even with, I know I'm the world's worst, even with the G5. We got him a really basic cell phone for the second half of 5th grade because in 5th grade in our little town, we live in the cutest little town, the 5th graders are allowed to walk after school on Fridays only to our village green. And they can go and play on the village green in front of the library, or they can go to the soda shop. That's really what it's called. They can walk around, and it sounds really sweet, but basically they terrorize people. And they got, the CVS in town limits how many kids can come in at once, please. But we got him a cell phone so he could only use it on Fridays. And he was not happy with us, but I saw no need. We had gone all of this time without share. So why the heck did I need it? And I know I'm crazy, but that's just the way I felt. So we finally got him a cell phone. And I think that Dexcom, frankly, is part of the reason why so many little kids, right, have phones. I feel for the parents who give their 4-year-olds phones. I mean, how do you lock that stuff down? Oh my God, it's so hard. I mentioned Beyond Type 1 was launched in 2015. I don't think I talked to them until 2016 for the podcast. And my initial reaction, I feel kind of bad about this, guys, but I said somewhere, either in the copy for the episode or in my pitch, I said Beyond Type 1, more than just a new font, because it just seemed like they had a new font and they were on Instagram, which I really wasn't on at the time. So I didn't get what Beyond Type 1 was. And now, of course, actually, I think they've really evolved into something different than what they started out to be. When you go back and see, they were always a super social media powerhouse doing a lot of good, empowering people, raising money for the things that they believed in. But they've since become kind of an umbrella group for smaller diabetes groups that might have gone away. And I think that's absolutely fantastic because we have all these little niches, right? So it's very cool stuff. I like that. All right. I did a post, my first post about social media problems in late 2015. That was when I started feeling judged. I started feeling bad. I started feeling like I don't know. I had to leave some groups. I stayed in some, but I started muting a lot of Facebook groups. And this is when I started speaking out a lot about judgment, about my experience is not your experience, about stop giving specific dosing information to people you do not know. And I still speak out about that. Of course, my number one soapbox issue is stop posting pictures of your children in distress. I'm amazed that that happens all the time. And you know what's interesting? I was doing those mini episodes earlier this year where I would kind of take an editorial stance. And I've stopped doing them because I don't know. My editorial stance right now is I'm going to make it through today and I'm not going to eat the whole bag of Cheetos. But I'll get to them again. But the one podcast episode that was the least downloaded, that went over like a, ton of bricks, was the one about please don't post pictures of your children on social media. People don't want to hear that. There's no audience for that. I found that very interesting. So maybe I'll do a counterpoint where I headline it something different. Like, you should always post pictures of your kid puking. Everybody wants to see that and it's good for the kid. And then maybe people will respond. I'm sorry, I shouldn't joke. Obviously, it's a serious issue and I don't think we should do it. Okay. What else did I do? Oh, I started doing tech nights here in Charlotte. We should do that again. Although it's hard now because there's only 3 pump companies. But I used to do these tech nights where I would call, I'm bananas. I would call, I don't have a company I don't have JDRF. I would just call, hey, we should do a tech night. And I got Animus and Tandem and Omnipod and Medtronic and, whoever to come out, and they would buy snacks and we would bring whatever we wanted to drink or whatever. And we'd have a bunch of moms and sometimes dads. Thank you. And we would have a tech night and we would see all the wares and all the stuff that they were doing. It was really fun. So I highly recommend if you can do that in your community, once we're able to see each other in person again. I guess you could do it virtually too, but the reps really like doing it. Maybe I should do that again. I mentioned the Dexcom G5 was approved, no receiver needed, straight to phone. Oh, it also for the first time included a pediatric approval. So it was down to 2 years old because in the past, you probably don't remember this if you're new, we were all off label because Dexcom was not pediatrically approved. And then you had a Dexcom pediatric, which had frankly, a crummier algorithm. It was really interesting. There were several algorithms floating around in those early days. Each one was improved, but we went straight from the pediatric, maybe it was a pediatric G4 or G5. I don't remember. I should have looked it up. But we went right from that to the regular old G5 with no receiver needed. And it was fabulous. It was so much better for us. And then at the announcement, they also announced that they were sharing data with Tidepool. Tidepool was not new in 2015. I want to say it was 2013, but it was already around. And they announced Tidepool announced that they were working with Animus in 2015. They were already working with Tandem and Omnipod. I missed when they partnered with Medtronic. It may not have been until the Loop announcement came, but Tidepool at the time was data. They were, I'm sorry, Howard. Look, I never describe it correctly. Basically, Tidepool allows you to see all of your diabetes devices' data, however you want to see them. So you can overlay, you can, use a CGM, you can, I think a meter, don't quote me, but you can use pump. And at the time all this data was locked up in silos, so you couldn't see anything. And Tidepool made that happen. Now Tidepool is also working on bringing Loop, the hybrid closed loop system, to the FDA. They are working with Medtronic. They are working with Omnipod. We shall see what happens. Okay. In September was Regan's Rule. And I'm still so angry at local media. We had one TV station who did an amazing job of covering this. So thank you so much, WBTV. But Regan's Rule was going to be a law, but it became a rule. But I'll take it. It happened because there's a little girl, Regan Oxidine, who passed away. She was a toddler. And it was one of these situations where they didn't know it was diabetes, right? She was in DKA. She was so sick. They kept checking, but they weren't checking for the right things. And she died. And her family, I don't know how you move forward at all with something like this, but her family rallied to push for legislation so that this wouldn't happen again. And they did not succeed in getting a law, but they got this rule. And the rule was that pediatricians should talk about this at every well visit. And it was the model for a few rules that have since moved, I think, up the East Coast. I'm not sure if anything happened in states out west, but it's a really big story. And it was a beautifully done story by Beyond Type 1. They really did a nice job with that, and we covered it as well. Terrible story, but good things came out of that. Insulin for All started the year before as a hashtag, but it really started taking off in 2015 on Twitter. And of course, we've seen what's happened with that. And as for us, we ended 4th grade. Benny became a big 5th grader, which is like the coolest class. at Davidson Elementary School. If you've read The World's Worst Diabetes Mom, then you know about the big field trip that the fifth graders take and the disaster that I thought it was going to be, but it all worked out. And my daughter in 2015 in the spring graduated from middle school and went into high school. So that was what was going on with us. When the podcast launched, I'll just give you a quick synopsis of podcasting. There were something like 250,000 podcasts in Apple Podcasts. I'll have to look up that exact number. But just this month, they ticked over 1 million podcasts. So things have changed a little bit. Now, that doesn't mean that all of those podcasts are producing all the time. I think I heard that 250,000 are in production in the last 90 days. And you also have to figure out how many are not one shots. Like I did a podcast called Stacey's Minivan Moments, and it was a test because a couple of years ago I spoke at Syracuse University. I did a talk called Can I Podcast from My Dorm Room? And I'm an SU grad. You can see the pom-poms behind me. By the way, my Yeti microphone was there and it was kind of arranged and it was nice. And I just remembered Benny did ask me, but I didn't think he took it yet. He took my microphone. So if you follow, please don't follow Benny anywhere on social media, but I think he's doing stuff on TikTok and I think he's using my microphone. But I'm a Syracuse grad, thus the orange pom-poms. I was doing a podcasting seminar for the kids and I did an Anchor podcast. Anchor is a free app that you can podcast from called Stacey's Minivan Minutes just to test it out. So I have a 4 or 5 episode nonsense podcast about Game of Thrones and some other nonsense stuff that I'll never return to again. Should that be counted as a real podcast? No. Tina says, I thought you were going to say not all podcasts are quality. Look, most podcasts are terrible, right? I listen to a lot of podcasts and I'm always looking for new ones. And bless their hearts, most of them are terrible. And it's not because the people are terrible. It's because the technology is so simple, guys. This is like a $50 mic I plugged into my computer. Don't do a podcast without a microphone or headphones or something. I have my little headphones, but it's like nobody wants to hear, that kind of stuff. Welcome. Somebody I'm in a bunch of the podcasting community, not to get too far from here. The podcasting community is a lot like the diabetes community. It's a little less supportive, but there are some wonderful people and I've made some great friends. But somebody I think at iHeart or somebody in charge of like a big media position called podcasting more of a flea market. And everybody got really offended. And I thought that's a perfect analogy because most of the stuff at flea markets is crap, but you're going to find some great stuff in there if you stick around and find it. And if you've heard me talk, I think everybody should try a podcast because your message may be heard by somebody who needs to hear it. Right? It might be therapeutic for you to share your message. And when I say crap, I'm talking technology and I can help you with that. Call me up. It'll be a piece of cake. I think there's a lot of value in sharing your story in a medium that works for you. Is it blogging? Is it Facebook groups where you're just chatting with other people? Is it these Zoom calls that we're all doing? Are you the life of the party on the Zoom call? Or are you someone who has questions that matter? Or is it podcasting? I really think that it's worth taking the risk. I laugh to say this now. I'm a professional broadcaster. You find out how professional you are when you don't have your technical producer or your audio engineer and you have to do this yourself. If you go back and listen, you can hear how bad the podcast sounds for the first few episodes. And I actually think the first year is pretty crummy because of my setup and my microphone. But it's not easy to do this if you don't understand the technology. But don't let that stop you because your message might be really important. And it's always, I hate to say the word important. Somebody needs to hear it. And that's one thing. Before I go, I'm going to start wrapping it up here because I can't believe almost 50 minutes has gone by. Thank you for sticking around for this. But one of the things that I struggle with the podcast, and I'll be honest with you, I'm trying to evaluate this year how I'm going to move forward. We are in the soup for 2020 because all my sponsors are on board. So we're going to be here through this year, full disclosure. But I'm not quite sure what I'm going to do going forward. I'm struggling with, after 5 years, figuring out what people really want to hear. I am a news person. My podcasts are going to be as they are, interviews or me doing editorials, but they're going to be a little bit more formal. They're going to be, responsible and ethical. And I hope, and that's who I am. I'm never going to be able to do a podcast where I say, your kid is high. Well, I think you should pre-bolus and then you should do this and then you should do that. That's not who I am. And I think that that's something that a lot of people want to hear. And I get a lot of private messages like that. What's the best pump? What's the best CGM? What's the best place on my child's body to put it? I think those are answers that I'm not qualified to give. And that's not a show that I'm comfortable doing. Should we just do tech news? I mean, it's amazing to me. I mean, I've done very heavy tech here, but that's what you all kind of tell me you want to hear. And that's what I'm really interested in too. I've talked about trying to reach people who are in different parts of our community, but they don't listen to podcasts, right? How do you reach people? It's hard enough to reach people who don't have access, who don't have, can't afford insulin. On social media, I'm begging my local news to do more stories on this stuff because they can reach so many more people. So I'm struggling a little bit with that, but I'll, keep me posted on what you want and I'll keep you posted where this all leads to. We're not going to hang it up anytime soon. And then right before I got on the line, something occurred to me that would be fun. And I'll post this in the group too before Tuesday. Let's do a scavenger hunt of old diabetes stuff. Because I know a lot of people in our group have had diabetes for 50 years or more. And I'd love to see the technology. So we'll kind of say, 2015, what were you using? What were your kids using? But maybe we'll do a scavenger hunt for other stuff. And I'll post a list of things we're looking for and give prizes for that. It's interesting to me that I don't feel, as far as I'm concerned, that anything has changed. But then I look at my kids. And in 2015, as I said, Benny was in 4th grade. Leah was graduating 8th grade. She's a freshman in college. She's driving, she's voting. I had to switch she had to switch all of her prescriptions over to her because she's an adult now. And that was really fun. Benny is 5'11". He's taller than me. He's driving. It's bananas. Things have changed so much. And I know that's just an old people thing, right? We feel like time is flying and we're not changing, but everybody else is changing around us. All right, ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much for joining me. Thanks for spending some of your valuable time with me. And, thanks for just being there. When I started the podcast, I was really hopeful that, it would be heard, that I could find an outlet for, I didn't even mention this, that I always talk back. Well, I did a little bit. I talk back to my radio all the time. I still do. I talk back to podcasts. I think it's a radio person thing. So thank you for giving me an outlet so my poor husband doesn't have to listen to me do all of that all the time. And thanks for letting me serve you. It's been a real privilege to be here and to get to ask these questions on a topic that I'm so passionate about. I did news talk radio for 10 years, and I'm really not a politics person anymore. Sometimes it can be fun. Sometimes it can be crazy. And this is much more rewarding. That's it. Thanks for joining me. And thanks for letting me get to episode 300. Holy cow.
You're listening to Diabetes Connections with Stacey Sims.
It's amazing how 5 years ago can seem like yesterday and then can seem like 100 years ago, right? In terms of the technology or what you were thinking at the time or how much your kids have grown. Oh my gosh, it was really fun though to go back and think about that year and think about what we were doing. And I said something in there about a scavenger hunt, right? Like, we should do a scavenger hunt. Well, since I had that idea, I kind of refined it. And again, not knowing exactly the time-shifty nature of podcasting here, exactly when this is going to happen, but the Facebook group is doing or has done a show and tell for old diabetes tech. That's what the scavenger hunt turned into. I figured that was easier. It just seemed like more of a fun idea for us to get together and show off what we have in the house. So to check on whether that's happened, go to the Facebook group, Diabetes Connections, the group, and you can see the events and when that Zoom call is going to happen. And I will be posting about it because I think it's such a fun idea. And maybe we'll do it again because not everybody is going to be able to make it to this one. All right, up next is Tell Me Something Good. But first, Diabetes Connections is brought to you by Dexcom. Do you know about Dexcom Clarity? I mentioned it, in that look back, but it is their diabetes management software. And for a long time, after it first came out, I really thought it was just something our endo used. But you can use it both on desktop or as an app on your phone. And it's an easy way to keep track of the big picture. I check it about once a week. I mean, if I'm being honest, I'd say after we got Control IQ, I checked it. Okay, I checked it every day after we got Control IQ. But I'm better now. I've backed off again. Because really, it does help me dial back and see longer term trends and not overreact. But when you get something new like that, you can't help yourself. The overlay reports help put context to Benny's glucose levels and patterns. You can even share the reports with your care team, which makes appointments a lot more productive. And frankly, that's all we used. We had a remote appointment, with a telehealth thing a couple of weeks ago, and we used Dexcom Clarity and Tandem software, and that's how our endocrinologist decided on insulin dosing. We made some dosing changes. It was really productive. Managing diabetes is not easy, but I do feel like we have one of the very best CGM systems working for us. Find out more at diabetes-connections.com and click on the Dexcom logo. Time for Tell Me Something Good. I want to start with Tom Carlia, who is a diabetes dad. He was on the show a few weeks ago, and he's been in the diabetes community for many years. His daughter was diagnosed as a toddler back in the 90s, and then his son was diagnosed as a teenager years later. But I'm talking about Tom because his son-in-law, Andre, is a police officer on Long Island in New York, and he was featured along with many other first responders in a big thank you in Newsday, one of the publications there. And they took pictures and posted a big thank you to doctors and nurses, police, firefighters, the brave men and women who are doing really an amazing job right now of keeping all of us safe. So I know Andre is just representing one of many, many people. But Tom, thanks for posting that and pointing that out. It's just wonderful. And of course, I think I've mentioned here, or maybe when I talked to Tom, Andre and Tom's daughter, Caitlin, are expecting a baby this summer. So we're wishing them all good health and stay safe. And Tom, thanks again for pointing that out. I promised earlier that I would be talking about other stuff that you sent in on what was going on in your life in 2015. April Blackwell works at NASA. We shared her story not too long ago. And she said, in 2015, I had just gone through 2 years of intense training to be a flight controller at NASA, the only T1D in mission control. Dream come true. Wow, talk about a milestone. April, thank you so much for that. And if you haven't heard the episode with her, it is remarkable. I mean, her story, not the interview. I didn't send this to April yet, but a friend of mine who does a lot with JDRF, not in Charlotte where I am, but in another chapter, posted that she had a teen girl who was kind of, I wouldn't say despondent, but she was really sad because she wanted to be an astronaut. And she was diagnosed with type 1, and she thought, there was no way she could even follow her dream in any way, shape, or form. And I gave her April's contact information. I told her about April and told her to follow her on Instagram. She's Nerdy April, and she's very responsive and friendly and wonderful. So I need to follow up on that and see what happened. But it's like when I talked to April and she said, be a rule questioner. Somebody's got to keep questioning. You don't need to break, but you need to question and keep pushing and see how far you can get. Another 2015 story came from Renza Shabilia. Oh, such a wonderful writer, just a great person who lives in Australia. And she said one of her favorite stories happened in 2015. And I remember this blog. This was a blog post she titled, Tigers Don't Care About Diabetes. This is a story where Renza meets an 8-year-old girl at a zoo. The girl is rather pitying to Renza about how her pump is not very interesting. It's quite boring and not bright. The little girl's pump is sheathed in a very fashionable pink skin. I'm going to link this blog up because I cannot do the story justice. But Renza is trying to give this little girl hope about a cure for diabetes that this girl does not need in any way, shape, or form. This girl has her head on straight and has apparently never been told that diabetes will get in the way of her career goals. And she is ready to rock. So I will save the punchline and the blog post for you to read yourself. But it really was wonderful. And it speaks to something that I've encountered a lot in the last 13 years with my son. Whenever I talk to adults, people who were diagnosed at least 15 to 20 years ago, or, who are diagnosed more recently and didn't have the best endocrinologist or the best bedside manner. I know this happens more recently too, but really in my experience, it's really a generational thing. They were told so much that they could not, right? That you won't be able to do this, that we need a cure before you can do that. And when my son was diagnosed, the endo said, hey, he can really do whatever he wants. Right at that point in 2006, no astronaut, as we've mentioned, no commercial pilot, which has changed in the United States, and no military, which has not changed. But, we've spoken to police officers, FBI agents, SWAT team people. Sure, there are limits. But these kids aren't told no. Nobody says you can't go back to college. You can't be a football player. You can't be Miss America. You can't be in pageants, which I use that story all the time because that's what Nicole Johnson was told. No more pageants for you. And she listened until she went back and then won in 1999. She won Miss America. So I love stories like that where we find that kids are not being told no with type 1 anymore. And sure, I know that I look at the world with rose-colored glasses. I've mentioned that before too, because we have had such a positive experience and we did have such a great, and we continue to have such a great endocrinologist. But I hope that's been your experience too. Not that diabetes won't hold you back, because it's a pain in the ass and you got to do a lot and you got to keep up with everything. And oh my gosh, there's so much that goes with it. But if you want to grow up and be a zookeeper, tigers don't care if you have diabetes. And that is Tell Me Something Good for this week. Please let me know about your submissions. If you've got a story, a diaversary, a healthcare hero, something good that's going on right now in this crazy time, shoot me an email, Stacey at diabetes-connections.com, or post in the Facebook group. Quick programming note. I said this on previous episodes, but here we are at number 300. If you are looking for the older episodes, if you want to go all the way back to the beginning, you should be able to do that on any podcast player. If for some reason they are not showing up, if you can't see all 300 or 310 in a couple of weeks or whatever we get to, then you probably just need to subscribe on that podcast player. Subscribing doesn't cost anything. It is free. Once you subscribe, you will see every episode. It's just a weird feature of some of these podcast players. The easiest way, though, to search is to go to diabetes-connections.com. We have a really robust search, and I've really stepped it up in the last week. So now we have search by keyword. You can enter anything you want, April, NASA, Disney, tigers, Dexcom, whatever you want. Search by category. And I've filtered it by advocate or athletes or actors or, resources, technology and tools, travel. So that's another way to search. You can filter by date, or if you want to see the entire episode archive, you can just hit the view archive button. Honestly, on my website, it loads slowly because I guess these are big files. But if you click over there, it just takes you to my podcast hosting service. It doesn't have as many bells or whistles, but the episodes load really quickly, and then you can find exactly what you want. I'm also going to put in a quick word about the world's worst diabetes mom, of course, available in paperback, Kindle, and the audiobook, which I read over on Amazon, or of course on my website. But I'm just going to ask that if you have read the book or listened to the book, if you would take the time to either write a review on Amazon, can be 2 sentences, or share it on your Facebook page. A couple of people did that recently. They shared it on their page, and it's just amazing what word of mouth will do. I'm excited, of course, to get the sales, but I'm also excited to get this message out. It always amazes me when parents don't understand that they can make mistakes with type 1 diabetes and their kid's going to be okay. In fact, the kid's going to be better off for those mistakes. And I'm so excited to get this out into the world more. In fact, I'm doing something with JDRF. We're going to do a multi-state webinar all about the world's worst diabetes mom coming up later this month. So I'll keep you posted on that. But if you've read it and you like it, please share it. I mean, it's great if you share the Amazon link too, but people know how to order books. But I really do appreciate it. Anyway, thank you so much for listening. Thank you for getting me to 300 episodes. Thank you to my editor, John Buchanan from Audio Editing Solutions, who has been with me for, what do you think, John, 200 of these episodes? I should have gone back and done the math, but I think shortly after episode 100, I switched over to a professional editor. I had edited some of it myself. I had hired a college intern who was really helpful, who, by the way, I also helped get a job at my old radio station. So we all help each other. But John, I can't imagine doing this without you. You put up with so many of my shenanigans as well. Oh my goodness. Next week, Breck Bassinger, who is starring in the new CW show Stargirl. She's going to come on and talk to us about that show. Do you remember her? She was the star of Bella and the Bulldogs. She's been in movies. She was at the Children's Congress a couple of years ago. And we talked to her about what it means to be part of this big superhero franchise that's debuting. So that is next week. And boy, it was really fun to talk to her and to find there was a surprise T1D connection to another cast member. So that is next week, episode number 301. I'm Stacey Sims. I'll see you back here next week. And until then, be kind to yourself.
Diabetes Connections is a production of Stacey Sims Media. All rights reserved, all wrongs avenged.